Hey everybody, Elida Zweidler-McKay with Engaging Leadership. I wanted to come talk to you today about how sometimes it can be too quiet at the top. When you're in a leadership position, one of the biggest challenges that you face is that it can be way too easy to fall out of touch with what's happening further down in the organization and what people are facing on the front lines. There are, policies and procedures that you might put in place, things that sound like a really good idea, that when you really look at them down on the front lines, aren't working or aren't working the way you expected that they would, or having some unintentional consequences. And one of the biggest challenges that I see for leaders is that too often they don't even know that those things are happening. They don't even hear about it. It just, it doesn't get communicated to you. One of my favorite shows to watch when I want to get all worked up about this is Undercover Boss. I don't know if you've seen Undercover Boss, but so often the premise of the show is that a leader will get dressed up in costume in a way that completely disguises their identity, and then they'll go around and take on different jobs in their organization to kind of get a feel for what's happening in different parts down on the front line in their organizations. And inevitably in the show, the upshot is that there were things happening down on the ground that the leaders had no idea about. A recent episode that I watched, I don't know if the episode itself is recent, but I watched it recently, was about the Nestle Toll House franchise of cookie shops that are like in shopping malls. They had put in place a requirement that a customer needed to go from placing their order to having their order and their change within 45 seconds. And when the executive was, on the front line at the store trying to serve a customer in that amount of time, she discovered how completely impossible it was. And of course, the store manager who was training her on it was pushing her to do it, but also kind of rolling her eyes about how they pretty much all know it's not something that they can actually accomplish. And it just underscored for me that dynamic where something that sounds really good at the top, some policy, some way of working, some procedure, some new initiative, might show really differently further down in the organization. And then the cost of that to the leader and to the organization. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So, one of the things that I think is the biggest tragedy of that situation, of that information not flowing up and down the chain, is that people on the front lines tend to become really discouraged and cynical when they get requests over and over and over again that are beyond what they can meet. And, feels like nobody's listening when they talk about how it's not working. That is what leads to disengagement on the part of employees and cynicism. And the biggest tricky wicket about that is that I'm sure there's not a single leader that would tell you that they're not listening or that they're not open to hearing stuff. So it's like there's this disconnect between what people are experiencing lower down in the organization and what people higher up in the organization are hearing about. And that's the part that takes a real conscious effort to overcome. Because if you don't, that's when you get disengagement, cynicism, turnover, because people don't like working in a place where they feel like the expectations that are put on them are impossible to meet. And that's something I'm hearing a lot about right now in the wake of COVID and everything that people are trying to juggle, as schools start to go back or don't go back or might go back, and all the kind of fatigue that people are feeling from having dealt with this situation for so long. It's like the unrelenting requests that are coming up and from their organization. People are burned out, they're exhausted. What sounds like a good idea, a good strategic initiative at the top is being met with pushback and cynicism and frustration because on the ground, it's just not matching up with the reality of the kind of energy and capacity that people have right now. And so, and then not only is that problematic in terms of employee turnover, because face it, we're coming into a recession, lots of people are going to need jobs, so that may not be so much of an issue if you don't really care about people. But disgruntled employees and insecure employees lead to dissatisfied customers, because the way employees feel about their work and feel about their experience in their companies affects how they're able to serve their customers. They might be able to fake it for most customers, but if something gets really hard, something that's really challenging, if they don't feel like the company has their back, it's going to be hard for them to really step into that challenging situation and wholeheartedly serve their customer in the way that they could do that more easily if they felt like somebody was backing them up, or like somebody also cared about them. So it's not just a nice to people kind of approach or problem. It's really a productivity problem. It's a customer service problem. When people feel like they're not heard, they feel like they're being asked to do things that are just outside the realm of possibility, that leads to some real disengagement. And the disengagement then is what feeds that lower productivity, lower customer service, and ultimately affects the bottom line. So those are, that's the challenge. So what can you do about it? Well, one of the things that you can focus on as a leader is really building a culture of engaging leadership, really building a culture where you're working in partnership with people, that you have open lines of communication, that you want to hear what people have to say. And you can't just do this by saying, my door's always open, of course you can come talk to me, because that disregards the true power differential that exists in your relationship with the people who report to you, and especially the people even farther down the chain than that. So no matter how often you say, my door is always open, if you're putting the onus on them to come to you, that creates too big a barrier for you to get that information. So there are some real strategies that you can use to be out in the field, to be connecting to people, to get what they really have to say to you. But it takes a conscious effort, and it takes a concerted approach to really put yourself out there in a way that you're going to get that kind of information that's going to help you to understand how the policies and the systems that you're setting up at the top are actually being implemented, or how they're being felt, or how they're working on the ground, and whether they really are serving your customers, whether they really are something that your employees can get behind and support. The other thing that you can do is to really create a culture of listening, where you're reaching out and you're seeking input, and that's important not only for you, but also that so that you cultivate that for yourself with the people who work for you, but also that you're supporting and training and coaching the people who work for you to do that same thing with their teams, and then to be coaching them to do that on down the chain. Because most of the information in an organization that's really valuable is at that customer interface, or at that supplier interface. And so you need to have a domino effect all the way up and down the chain that has good listening skills and good engagement skills. And so for you as a leader, it's not only about doing that well yourself, but then also being able to coach your folks to be able to do that, so that you really are creating that flow of information. And along those lines, you also need to create a culture of reality testing, of gathering data, gathering information, checking out your ideas and your policies and your practices against real world scenarios. I think if the Toll House franchise had done that with their 45-second rule, really gone into like even the coffee room in their headquarters office and tried out, like, okay, let's pretend we're doing it, they might have had a different take on that. And maybe they did, I don't know, maybe something was different in the way they tested it from how they actually did it. But it certainly looked like in that episode that they hadn't tested it, which just made me wonder, like, so why did you choose 45 seconds, and where did that come from? And did you think it was real? Like, where's the reality testing in that culture? That's my question. So, finding people who can do this with you, and really creating a culture in your team where people tell you the truth, they bring you the data, they bring you the facts, they reality test things with you, is really important. And at the core of all of that, there's this idea of partnership. For you, at the core of that, for you as a leader, is back to that idea of your internal executive presence. Are you really holding on to an internal sense of openness, of listening to information that's coming in, even if it's coming in a messy way or a way that might have you tend to be defensive? Do you have the internal executive presence to manage that defensiveness, to manage your natural human tendency to want to push away information that disagrees with what you want, or push away something that might feel like criticism? Do you have the internal executive presence to contain those inherent human responses and open up to the information that's coming your way, so that you can use that to then be the kind of leader, make the kind of decisions that your organization needs you to make? That's what I work with my clients on, how to create that kind of internal executive presence that allows them to step into partnership with their staff, with their team members, with their colleagues, and then how to create that sense of partnership, both at their level, but then all the way along up and down the chain in their organization, so that they create that reality testing and that listening that supports the information flow, so that they don't end up in the place that so many of these leaders do in this, in the show Undercover Boss. Like, you wouldn't have to go undercover if you had that kind of reality testing and communication chain set up. So if that's interesting to you at all, or it strikes any chords for you, or you feel like as a leader you've kind of gotten yourself into a place where you are a little bit in a echo chamber, or people are telling you what they think you want to hear and not telling you the truth, let's talk. Let's talk about what what that situation is doing for you and what you can do differently to move your career forward. Best way to do that is for you to book a call with me at zmcoach.net/call. That's zmcoach.net/call. We'll get on the phone for about 45 minutes. We'll talk about your current situation, where you are now as a leader, where you are now in your career. We'll talk about where you want to go and what's possible. And if I can help you get from here to there, we can look at what that would look like. And if I'm not the right fit for whatever it is that you want, I know lots of great coaches, and I'd be happy to point you their way. All right. It was great talking to you today. I look forward to connecting with you again next week. Take care.